Yeah, thanks a lot again. My name is Irena Kuzborska. I teach at the Department of Education at the University of York. And today I'll talk about those theoretical dimensions of cultural variability and how we apply these dimensions to our teaching. There won't be specific kind of instructions to how to apply these values to language teaching, but this will be more general instructions how we could apply these values to teaching in general, including language. But I think this is very important for language teachers, because as language teachers, we teach students from different cultures. And also, even if we teach languages as modern languages, even in Europe, we have different cultures and different values and how they understand communication, interaction in different contexts. So I hope this workshop will be useful for you in different ways. So just briefly, what exactly I'm going to do in this workshop. So first of all, I'll give a kind of brief introduction to the understanding of culture and how values they play an important role in our interaction. And just from the start to say that we as individuals, we have our unique values. We can't, we say there are no individual values. We have these unique values, but we also can kind of classify values according to some kind of countries. So there are representative sets of values that could be applied to specific countries, and we will talk about that. So my workshop is really based on Hall's differentiation of high and low context cultures, and Hofstede's 5 value dimensions that he differentiated. So which is individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, power distance, uncertainty avoidance, long-term versus short-term orientation. But in this culture, in this workshop, I'm going to focus on these dimensions only, on high-low context, understanding, individualism, collectivism, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance. And we'll do, as Thomas said, we'll do some tasks to really understand, to assess our values in terms of how we interact with each other. So as I said, it would be good probably to really understand, again, culture is a very complex concept. And I'm not going to explain these differences, but I'm going to give you a minute to read this definition of culture, which is given by Matsumoto. So as this definition says, well, basically culture involves many things. We have our attitudes, values, beliefs, norms, different behaviors. In other words, culture provides us with some kind of implicit theories in terms of how to think, how to even feel, how to behave, and most importantly, how to communicate with each other. So in other words, the influence of culture on our interaction is significant. So, we have these implicit theories in terms of how we have to communicate, what we have to think, and all these implicit theories, of course, they will influence our communication with others. Yet, the influence of culture is really paradoxical. So as this famous anthropologist Edward Hall once said, culture hides much more than it reveals, and strangely enough, what it hides most effectively from its own participants. In other words, we really, when we communicate, when we behave, when we do certain things, when we think certain things about certain things, we really don't know why we're doing this. Because, as I said, culture provides us with some implicit theories that we actually are not aware of. Usually, you know, when we learn these theories, we learn also these theories implicitly, subconsciously, by growing in that culture. So nobody teaches us these rules in terms of how to behave or how to think. So we just learn by growing in a specific culture. And that's why it's really, the influence, as I said, of the culture is really significant, but we really don't know how much culture influences our behavior and our interaction. So one of the ways really to try to understand why we behave in a certain way, why we think in a certain way, is to, so when we come to communication, it's good to start identifying the context, the cultural context, because this context can help you with your communication. And here by context, I mean, so Neuleb gave his definition. It says the context includes the cultural, physical, social, relation, and perceptual environments. So in other words, when we talk about the culture, we talk about language, race. Physical, it's the physical environment, school, university, house, home. Social, relational environment is when we interact with each other, for example, relationships between teachers and students, or superior, subordinate. And perceptual environments, this is our understanding about people's values, beliefs, which is really difficult sometimes to understand especially if we interact with people from different cultures. And what Hall said is the degree to which people focus on these contextual factors during communication varies considerably from culture to culture. So in other words, you know, not all people from all cultures pay attention to these cultural contextual factors, or not to a certain degree that they would have to pay to. And based on this argument, Hall distinguished between high and low context orientation cultures. So Hall says that cultures, so low context cultures, people here, they look to language for information. So because in these cultures, little meaning is determined by context. Everything is actually communicated by the language. People look to verbal codes to understand what's going on in the context. So, and in these cultures, people rely on this verbal communication, verbal codes. So verbal messages tend to be very elaborate, highly specific and detailed. And of course, those people who can express themselves verbally, they are really valued in that society, because it's a very important skill to have. In high context cultures, it's a bit different, because here, so in these cultures, people don't say much, but they try to look to the environment, to these either physical context or perceptual context. So they look for information, look to this environment for the information and try to understand what's going on in this context. And of course, in these context, people, they have developed their greater sensitivity to non-verbal messages, because they also have to use a lot of inferencing, and their communication is really indirect. They use a lot of body language, so different types of non-verbal codes to understand what's going on. So as you can see, there are differences in terms of how people, or the extent to which people rely on the contextual information to understand what's going on in the communication. And again, based on these assumptions, Hall said that there are, as I said, cultures, we can say that there are these, there are cultures that we can distinguish in terms of this kind of extent of reliance on the context. So for example, low context cultures would be Great Britain, France, USA, Scandinavia, Germany, Switzerland, and high context cultures would be China, Japan, North and South Korea, Vietnam, Arab, African countries, and so on and so forth. Sorry, it's my background. In the background, I've got someone to collect my parcel. Okay. So, and when we try to distinguish the countries in terms of these values, or in terms of how much they look at the context, we really need to be also careful not to really rely on these extreme categorizations, because there are individuals that could be, in the low context cultures, there could be individuals that might rely those low context cultures rely in then another cultures. So, in other words, there are differences in terms of the countries, as we all know, and we shouldn't be categorizing them in terms of exclusively high context or exclusively low context cultures. I have prepared a questionnaire, a very short questionnaire. Well, it's 32 statements, but these statements are very straightforward. So you just need to indicate in terms of from 1 to 9, you need to indicate the extent to which you agree with the statement. And then there is a scoring, but you need to pay attention to the scoring because some of the answers will have to be reversed. And then you will sum up your answers, and then you will get the score. So, and we will discuss these scores and see how much you agree with these statements, whether you have any questions about these statements. So once you do the questionnaire, we will put you in groups and discuss the questionnaire results in small groups. So you can access the questionnaire from the Google spread. I'm going to share. I'm going to post these links on in your chat, in the chat, so you can. I think I need to stop. So you can access, as I said, Google spreadsheet, or you can also get an Excel sheet from the Padlet here. So if you could do this questionnaire, I'll give you maybe 7-8 minutes to do the questionnaire on your own. And then when you come back, so we can discuss these results together in small groups. If you have any questions, you can always post your questions in the chat. So I'm going to...
Irena, sorry. It seems like you have to give access.
Do I? How about the Padlet? How about the Padlet?
The Padlet is better. You don't need access for the Padlet.
So yeah, when you go to the Padlet, so you could just double click on this one, and you can download the Excel sheet into your laptops. And so when you have the Excel sheet, so when you enter the score, so you then afterwards you just sum up. I'll show you if I have. So can you access the Padlet? Okay, yeah. So I'll give you 7 minutes. Not sure where you are, but I'll give you a few more minutes to finish. Okay, so welcome back to the main room. So we just briefly, do you want to share any discussions you had about your scores? Were you surprised with your scores?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, my name is Salwa. I got a total of 155, which if my math isn't that bad, as I know, I think is in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I happen to have a colleague in my room. We didn't have a chance to talk much because we were all busy calculating our marks. But I was saying that I belong to the Arab culture, which is actually high context. So I'm saying it could be that spending a lot of time here in the UK as a low context culture maybe have caused some kind of balance, changed us. So I'm happy with my mark anyway to be in the middle. So I don't know if it is what I think or.
I think it's good to have a balance, kind of abilities. It's a skill, actually. It's a very important skill. This contextual understanding ability or competence is a very important skill. And this is what I'm kind of researching at the moment, looking how much students really pay attention to what is required of them, because they, especially when it comes to reading and writing, we have our beliefs. We think that this is universal reading, universal writing, but there are so many differences in terms of what is required of them. There are different expectations in different disciplines. So, and paying to these contextual factors is really important. It helps with your, for example, my case with my, with the students' written communication, or when they have to write the assignments. So in any communication, this ability to really read the context, understand the context is very important.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me to read one of the questions about using colorful words, because I remember at some point my supervisor was telling me that I actually use a lot of colorful words. So it was interesting to see that. So I wasn't aware of that myself, but I think I gave myself a higher mark just bearing in mind what my ex-supervisor said to me at some point. So maybe I have changed again, but I just put a high mark for that. And sometimes I feel aware about where I come from and where people from this culture come from. And I think sometimes I'm conscious about adjusting or having this kind of balance.
But at the same time, the verbal communication is very important. So especially as you probably noticed in this culture, you need to communicate your message very clearly, in detail, explicitly.
True.
Yeah. Any comments? Any other comments from other? Just one more comment if you want to share. Let's go.
We were kind of surprised in our group that Britain and Germany were in the same category, because we think that British people never say what they mean, and Germans always say exactly what they mean.
Yeah, I think it's probably a different kind of trait. I don't want to go into the details here, but in terms of how much information you provide to people, even I myself, from I would say high context culture, Lithuania is that, well, we will check later on at the end of this workshop. I'll show you there is a website, you can check any country on this. But coming to the UK, I was surprised how much you are given the information, detailed information about what you have to do in question. Do they think I'm really dumb? I don't understand. I really don't need that much information. But here they provide so much information about everything. And this is kind of a cultural thing. Okay, so shall I move to the other values? And then we can discuss the other ones as well. So now we've got Hofster, Professor Geert Hofster. So actually he passed just last year. So he was a very famous social psychologist, and he was also a former IBM employee. And he did this very extensive research on to see how values affect our interaction, even in organizations, even in a kind of IBM, seems like the same corporate culture, but how people in the same corporate culture, they behave differently. So, and he did this research in 1967, 1973, so really he got a lot of data. He got employees from over 70 countries. And he identified these 5 main value dimensions that really differentiate these cultures. And they mentioned these are the values. And so he said that really it's important to understand which values we identify with, because this kind of understanding can help, to understand why we behave in a certain way, and of course, helps with our communication in different ways, in different spheres of life. So as I said, we are going to focus on 3 of them: individualist versus collectivist, power distance, and uncertainty avoidance values. So first of all, individualism. In these cultures, the independence is really valued here. And as you probably know, so here is the focus on freedom of choice, personal responsibility, personal autonomy. And individual goals, they are more valued than group goals. And so if you look at the questionnaires, for example, when they used to assess people's values, so this is the questionnaire, I want to win, how much you agree with the statement, for example. And in these cultures, individuals, they form groups, they have groups, but they form a lot of groups, and these groups are short term. They are just for the purpose of achieving something. So people don't stay in those groups for long. And in these societies, people tend to see themselves as individual, unique from others, distinct from others. And of course, they have their opinions. They are not afraid of expressing their opinions, sharing attitudes with each other, with people. Now, in collectivist cultures, so here emphasis is on interdependent relationships and responsibility shared. People in the group, members of the group, they are accountable for what they are doing, what they've done. And here the interests and goals of the group take precedence over the interests and goals of individuals. So usually they see themselves as a team, a player of a certain group. And they say, so they don't say I'm unique, but they say I'm a member of a family, I'm a member of this group, of this discipline, or so on and so forth. And the cooperation and harmony are very important in these societies. So they usually don't want to stand out from the group, from the crowd, because the standing out from the group could be even punished, in some culture societies. So they understand this, and really they respect group members, and they see group members as equal participants in any activity. So they share. We will talk about, when we talk about power distance. So they have, in these cultures, they have certain roles to perform in groups. They share certain obligations, and these roles are based on their status and rank. Now, looking at the cultures, we can see countries. So we can see that at the top, these are individualistic countries. And again, we can see that USA, Australia, Great Britain, Netherlands, New Zealand, they are at the top, very individualistic countries. And here, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, Ecuador, Guatemala. So these are more collectivist cultures. And again, I would say we need to be careful about these categorizations, because I think nowadays, especially in workplaces, we can see that there are a lot of group works going on, teamwork going on, because we appreciate this team working value as well. Now, let's discuss this. Let's think whether you really think that, I'm not going to ask you to complete a questionnaire. There are questionnaires to assess this value as well, but we're not going to do this. Just think whether you think you belong to individualistic or collectivist culture. Well, we've got the rankings already, but as I said, as a person, because there could be, you know, individuals that might differentiate themselves differently from, for example, individualistic culture or from collectivist culture. So why do you think you belong to that culture, and what are the signs? And how these dimensions, this dimension of individualism or collectivism can influence your teaching. So Thomas, could we discuss this maybe for 7 minutes?
Okay, I'll open the rooms. 7 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, do you have any comments? Just a few comments before we continue with two other values.
Maybe I will say something, Irena. I'm aware my voice may not be very clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Yeah, because my connection is not good. I'm a little bit critical of steady approach, and also in a sense whole approach, because in part it's quite dated. In part it refers to a specific kind of group of people that were IBM worker in one case, rather limited sample, even if it was more than 100,000 questionnaire, but event boils down to not that many when you divide by nations, and which is probably the issue that is most difficult for us, equating culture to nation. And here we have a very multilingual, multicultural, multi-identities kind of people who actually are very flexible, but that is not just for people who are bilingual, trilingual, multicultural. Anybody belongs to different cultural groups. So when you try to actually boil it down to whether you're a collectivist or an individualist, it's basically verging on the stereotyping, when you if you advise people that they go to China, Japan, and that is a collectivist, well, maybe in some aspect, but so are others that are individualistic, So you always find lots of counterexample, and in particular now where culture is global and people are exposed to global behavior, we may be in a better position to talk about hegemony of some kind of patterns, like academic English is Anglo-based, that's the rules of the game. And business meetings are, again, Anglo-American based rule of games, rather than, let's say, a little corner of the world where they have a different way of negotiating business deals and so on. So I wonder whether there is a danger in all this of stereotyping rather than opening up doors towards a dialogue that includes diversity wherever you find it, with the acceptance that we are indeed all different. And so we want a flexible approach rather than a rigid approach to have such category in place. So that's just kind of general comment on the difficulty to carry out the task, I suppose, on my part at least.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. Yeah, I think it's a very, very valid comment, and I agree with that. We shouldn't be categorizing people according to these values completely, because there are dangers, then stereotyping about people, either from those cultures, they have these and these values. Definitely agree with that. And on the other hand, I also, as a first kind of step to our awareness about these differences, I think it's good to know something about these differences in terms of why we behave differently. Again, this is just Hofster's explanation of how cultures could be different, and he gave these values. Although, again, as I said, we've got different values. We are very, individual, could be individual, have our unique values, but these values are still applied, are still considered in different, for example, organizations as well. And when you have these experiences with people from other cultures, when you think about these values, there is some truth, I would say. As I said, for example, Hall's low and high context cultures. I noticed this myself. I couldn't understand why I felt uncomfortable when people were giving me so much information here. And then when I would go to my country, there is not much information given, so I have to understand what's going on and what is the answer. And then I kind of realized that, there are some kind of common values that we share. But there are also specific values that we have, each of us individually. So how about others? What do you think? Karen and Eleanor, I think you've got hands.
Hi, yes. Regarding the kind of collectivist individualist dichotomy, something that we discussed was the fact that sometimes there can be this uneasy coexistence between them. To think of it as a dichotomy is maybe the very simplified version. And quite often what can happen is that there is a disparity between what is said to be the situation and what actually is the situation. So, for example, you could have a group who are, let's say a group of students who are asked to do a group project together, and so there's this idea of you have to work collectively, you have to work as a team, and so on and so on. But simmering beneath the surface of that, there's a lot of individualism there. Everybody is, really, really, desperate to get, the highest mark they possibly can get. And, there's probably a lot of tensions within the team where people feel that other people, aren't putting their weight and, putting them down and possibly jeopardizing other people's chances of getting a good mark and so on. So sometimes there is this disparity between what we see on the surface and what we're told is happening on the surface, this nice sort of collective ideal, everyone working together as a team, and the individualism, which is simmering beneath. So I think that's, if we're talking about dimensions, and using the word dimensions, we can consider it a very multi-dimensional and multi-layered and very tangled web.
That's definitely agree with that. And as I said, beware of these dichotomies, because we can't just differentiate people on all cultures in terms of these extreme categories, but we need to be aware of the complexity of values we have. Even with the family, we can't talk about a kind of culture in general of the family, but then within the family we have individuals with their own cultures, subcultures as well.
We have two more questions, Donata and Eleanor. Donata?
Hi. Yes, I just echo what Sonia said. I feel very uncomfortable dealing with these fixed categories, and I think we should, in our group, we discuss these, and I think we should help students actually to deal with complexity and ambiguity, and rather than fixed culture. I know it's easier in a way to teach in that way because it's easier to see the world into blocks and easier for the student to navigate, but life and reality is not like that, particularly in globalized contemporary societies. So I think deconstructing if you use the categories to deconstruct and maybe to work critically with the students and to help them navigate the idea that culture and identity are fluid, complex, not homogeneous, and not so fixed into category, then I think it's better rather than teaching them the categories, and that's using them critically with students. That's what I think.
Yeah. So it's for this workshop, I just really wanted to show that there are values that we attach to, and we our behavior differs because we have these values. In my module, I have a session on disciplinary differences. Within a discipline, I talk about the complexity of different expectations, values, how we do research differently, and camps we subscribe to. So definitely, but I think it's just a starting point to try to understand, that we have differences.
Eleanor Parks?
So it's just actually echoing some of what has already been said before. I just thought it would be relevant also to mention that, Fred Durbin has been quite critical, extremely critical of Hofstede's framework, particularly because it can lead to overgeneralization and stereotyping people of coming from a given culture or a given country. It's sort of, going back to that, to the context not only of societies that have seen mass migrations and the diversity that we see in the UK and other Western countries, but even in other contexts, even in Asian cultures. I mean, we'll see that there are so many different factors affecting beliefs and behaviors aside from what could be the cultural background of an individual's parents or one parent, or the social context in which they grew up in or in which they are living as adults. In many cases, there are people who have parents from two different cultures or perhaps more. They may have grown up in one country, lived in a second, worked in a third, and so on, and then may have an interest that involves a third or fourth or fifth culture. And then you can say, to what extent can you identify, this, can you put this person into a box, really? And I think, there's dangers there. I mean, I do agree that, Hofstede's work is not totally irrelevant. I think it can be a great starting point for critical discussion. We do see things, even in Western society, even on campus, for example, where you see, okay, certain initiatives are clearly driven by an individualistic culture. They are trying to encourage students to build that individualism, that individual success, let's say, which could be linked to what Western culture, how we perceive it. But there are so many different factors involved, and I think even differences between siblings within the same family, and that's where we see that personality also plays a great role in values and behaviors.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your comment. I definitely agree with all those comments. And as I said, I still think that there are values that common, we possess some common values. And but again, it's just the first step to acknowledge our differences. And then, of course, we need to understand each of us individual, and we need to acknowledge that we might diverge from these kind of common values. Okay, so so I will continue with my slides. So another value is power distance value. So it's about the extent to which the less powerful members of institutions and organizations within a country expect and accept that power is distributed individually. So it's just, again, Hofstede's definition, it's written in 2010, so we still have these discussions. Some of you might not agree with that, but yeah, so there are distinctions between cultures who have possess small power distance or large power distance. And so on this argument, Hofstede said that there are low power distance cultures and high power distance cultures. So people from low power distance cultures expect to be treated in the same manner as those who have more power than them. So the emphasis is on equality, democracy. Even in organizations, we see that the relationships between superior and subordinates are more or less equal. There are discussions, consultations of a superior with their subordinates, and it's just normal. In those high power cultures, people from these cultures, they accept that inequalities are part of the society. We can see there are strict, rigid hierarchies for example, in organizations and workplaces. There is this listening to your boss, superiors, they have power more than subordinates. So in other words, there is high dependency of subordinates on superiors. And again, when we have the questionnaires to assess this value, so we have these items. I'll give you a minute to read these items here. And so, yeah, we have also ranking of the countries, but again, we need to be critical of these rankings. Although, as I said, at the end of this workshop, I'll show you the tool to differentiate countries based on these values. The tool which is still used, you know, it's still alive. So we have high power distance cultures such as Malaysia, Philippines, Arab countries, Mexico, India, low power distance cultures such as USA, Great Britain, Denmark, Israel, Austria. Again, I don't know how much time we have here. Okay, we'll have. So what I want you to do is, again, discuss this value. Look at the dialogue, see what's happening here. What is the issue here? And then after discussing this, may also discuss this value. What do you think about this value, and how this value could help us or not help us in our teaching? Because again, as you said, some of you disagree with these crude values, absolute values, and as I said, to some extent I agree with you, definitely, but also, as I said, there are values that we could still consider, start from this point of view, rather than thinking about individual differences. We could still have some awareness of these differences. So maybe I don't know, Thomas, do we have time? 5 minutes for this discussion?
Yeah, we have altogether 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, we can, we can.
Or we could discuss now together.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, just I'll give you a minute to read the dialogue and then discuss this together. So those who agree that there are cultures that have high power distance, they you know, there are hierarchies. They think that there are hierarchical cultures. So what do you think? How would you expect language students from high power distance cultures to behave in class?
If I may, sorry. Sure. I think students from high power culture would be maybe talking less in class, maybe also just getting along with what the teacher says, not expressing their opinions much. That's what I think.
Yeah. Okay. How about others?
I agree with what has just been said. And then if we contrast that against what we meaning in England, have got as expectations for how the pupils or learners in a group, in a class interact, we place great emphasis on the teacher not being the fountain of all knowledge, but learners interacting with each other, learning from each other, learning with each other. The social constructivist approach is really important to us. So my question is, we have got that knowledge, we have got that understanding. So now how do we deal with it? What does it mean for the classroom? You know, knowing all the sort of the facts that you have presented, and that's great. But can we sort of think about more in more pragmatic terms? What does it actually mean when we teach multicultural groups? There's me as a German teaching trainees who sit in front of me who are from Spain, others are from Germany, others are from Austria. So having that understanding, where do we go from here?
Yeah. So this is the discussion. This is
Yeah.
the space for discussion, for this discussion. But again, as I see, we've got different views in terms of these categorizations. And if you think that there are no cultures that have hierarchical structures, so probably you just, you know, again, on this belief, based on your beliefs, you will teach differently. But if you acknowledge that there are students who treat their teachers as like parents, for example, and in these high power cultures, there is this very, you know, attitude to teachers. Teachers for them are parents. I've done some, you know, I've interviewed some Chinese students. I know how they treat teachers, how they look at teachers. There are these differences. We don't look at teachers as our parents. In these high power distance countries, again, this as you said, the teachers should know all the answers, the right answers. They expect teachers to give the answers because they are teachers. In low power distance cultures, well, you know, teachers are as friends. You know, they don't know everything, and we know, you know, we are fine with that. But as I said, there are these differences. They exist still now because I interview students and I know about these differences. But as I said, these are just first steps to acknowledge these differences. I'm not saying that we should, and at the very beginning, I said we should be aware of these categorizations. We need to look at an individual as well. So in terms of what to do, again, I think we need to question our beliefs, what we believe, you know, about our universal. You would think that, you know, our values, beliefs, they are the most appropriate or right. Because I'm not saying that there is no right, no wrong, because we're all different. We all accept our differences. We should be accepting our differences. But so that's why I think we should be accepting differences, not, you know, thinking that we are the same.
Can I say a comment as well on that? I think also it's important, I'm talking from the point of a language teacher. If we try to involve culture in the classroom or involve students' voice, I think it will be important at the beginning to listen to students and see what they expect. So, and then we can kind of compromise and convey to them how, for example, how their expectations might be met or how they might be met in a different way and how things are different. I think talking about this explicitly is important, and students are always welcoming or willing to listen if things are explained. For example, students who come from high power distance culture, one major problem I think is that they do not appreciate peer work or group work and peer marking, for example, because they think this is just a student like me. We're not learning from, I'm not coming here to learn from a student. I want to learn from the teacher, like I said earlier. Just explaining the benefits of group work and how it can be important, can clarify things to them.
I think with the group works, probably they might be comfortable. They come from well, again, I'm sorry if someone doesn't like these categorizations, but students coming from individualistic cultures, according to Hofstede. So, you know, they could be working as team members. So I think, and it would be important for teachers to give specific roles. Those group works, for example, in my classes, they work if you assign specific roles. Because if you just say, just discuss, again, students from those collectivist cultures wouldn't want to disturb the harmony of the group. And we had these issues just recently in our department, you know, so students are silenced not to talk in the groups because, again, different beliefs and different values. But if you assign specific roles, you know, you need to be a, let's say, a note taker, or you are discussant, you need to be questioning. So I think then they understand that these roles are assigned and we are doing something common.
And that so it helps them to learn from each other or to complement each other as well. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm aware of the timing. I'll just briefly just mention the last value, and I'll show you the tool that you can use to differentiate these values. So the last one is uncertainty avoidance culture. So it's the extent to which people within a culture are made nervous by situations which they perceive as unstructured and clear, unpredictable situations, which they therefore try to avoid by maintaining strict codes of behavior and a belief in absolute truth. So, and again, based on this argument, Hofstede differentiate between people, cultures, uncertainty, I wouldn't say now cultures, probably people, uncertainty-oriented people versus certainty-oriented people. So people with weak law uncertainty avoidance, for them uncertainty is normal, so ambiguity is normal, so they are not afraid to face these ambiguous situations. And for example, in school settings, so you know, they are comfortable with discussions, with open questions. People from not from, but who have this strong high uncertainty avoidance orientation, so for them uncertainty is not normal, it's more a threat, and they try to avoid these kind of situations. And so they like structured situations. So, and again, if we think about cultures, but just again carefully, so in those strong high uncertainty avoidance orientation cultures, which is Lithuanian, and my culture is really strong high uncertainty avoidance country. So we have, our classes are very structured. We know we plan everything, and then so because we are uncomfortable of these ambiguous situations. And again, one's level of tolerance for uncertainty, ambiguity, and communicative strategies they use for reducing this uncertainty vary across cultures and across individuals. And so if we have this low context orientation, so we use a lot of verbal information seeking strategies. We'll ask a lot of questions, but those the high context cultures or those who uncertainty is not normal for them, so they look for the environment, to the environment, social, racial, and perceptual context for information. So again, there are cultures that we can think that they have some of these orientations. And the last thing, we are not going to discuss this, but the last thing I want to show you is really, if you want to, you know, just to have a first step in understanding a different culture, so you can use this tool. So where you can compare countries. So for example, if I type my country, China. Let's say Germany. So United Kingdom. So we have these differences. So Lithuania is really high
We
and
can't see your screen.
Sorry?
Yes.
We can't see your screen.
You can't. Okay.
No, you need to get out of the PowerPoint presentation and then
sorry.
yeah, so we can see. Yeah. Now you need to share your screen with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just a second. Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, if you look at these countries, let's say Lithuania and United Kingdom, you see there are differences in terms of, for example, uncertainty avoidance. As I said, Lithuania is very high uncertainty avoidance culture, and myself, I have noticed this, and United Kingdom is low uncertainty avoidance culture. For them, uncertainty is just normal. And if you look at Germany, would be similar to Lithuanians. China is similar to the United Kingdom, although again, in depending on the situation, as probably I don't know if you've experienced it, but Chinese students, they try to to get all the answers correct. They think that there are answers there, and so they would avoid uncertainty in this respect. But so this is a kind of a general tendency, I would say. But as I understand, as some of you expressed, we need to be very careful about these categorizations. In terms of power distance, we have the difference here between China and other countries. Well, there is another value very recently proposed, indulgence value, which you could look at if you want it in your own time. I'm going to share this. Stop sharing this. And so yes, if you have any questions, you can just maybe the last the references if you wanted to, but there are we've got some nice recommendations from the chat as well, and that's all. So I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Irena. The time is up, but we can continue if whoever wants to maybe ask a question or a comment. We have a bit of time, so if you want to hang around a little bit, any more comments, experiences with or without or against Hofstede?
Yeah.
One question in the chat was, are there more recent studies? It is true that obviously Hofstede developed the approach already some time ago, maybe also at a time where migration and the global diaspora was not as pronounced as it is nowadays. So maybe
it's more the studies still, in terms of how these values could affect interactions in organizations and corporations. So there are studies still going on, and so we still have these differentiations. But again, as I said to Sonia, I have this session on these differences, and I think it's a first step to acknowledge these differences. but I speak about really more specific differences in terms of even in as I said, in the same discipline, we have differences, different values, expectations in terms of how we should write or read. So we need to be aware of these specific differences as well. And as I noted at the very beginning, really make sure we don't categorize people in terms of these. But in general, being aware that there could be something related to high power or low power differentiations, or even cultures that don't tolerate uncertainties or ambiguities. So it's a good start in our communication.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in the chat, we have also a couple of more suggestions, further reading. I want to still bring to your attention one longer comment from Yukiao, and specifically whether you could share some thoughts on intercultural training using Hofstede's model. Would it be dangerous in terms of potentially essentialism in this context to use it for intercultural training? It's obviously quite.
If we talk about differences and we don't point out specific values, so we could just say, yeah, we all individuals. So, but let's show us specific values. We all have, as I said, I agree. These are just starting points, but we need to somehow language to understand there are differences, and this is just an example of Hofstede's differentiation of these values. And there are different types of values, different categorizations. But these values have been spoken about, and we need to be critical in terms of these values. But I've kind of, as I said, I've experienced this myself, these kind of differences, and we still experience this with students, high power cultures, low power cultures, or individualist versus collectivist. And sometimes I couldn't understand why things were happening, why things were awkward sometimes, those situations. But when you start from some kind of categorizations, you then go deeper, you understand that, yes, we probably have different values, different understandings about what's happening. And we bring some cultural traits. We all individual, but we have cultural traits. So it's just how you look at the cultures. This is the way you look, but you can categorize values, in different ways, and see there are different values. But sometimes it's good to have that kind of common understanding that there are some differences in terms even of the cultures. But it's just the first step, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be just applying this framework, Hofstede's framework, no. But this framework has been applied, and it's still being applied, just to raise people's awareness about these differences, cultural differences. We talk about individual differences, and these are more psychological differences, but we also talk about cultural differences as well.
Okay, thank you. If there is no other comment or question, I think, yeah, we can bring this to an end or to a close. Yeah, we've overrun a little bit anyway. Apologies for that. Just before I formally close this session, I just want to share with you a feedback form. I'll put it in the chat, but fear not, I will share it with you through an email as well anyway. But I put in the chat a short Google feedback form where you can share with us your thoughts on this workshop. So thanks again, Irena, for introducing us to considerations of inter and transcultural communication today. we had a very good discussion, some controversies as well, and that can only be helpful. And I think in many ways it is really a good start to develop this discussion further in the Language Teaching Forum and wherever we and you are. And specifically our next workshop, I think will also bring us a different perspective on intercultural communication and maybe also see other sides to this. So I hope some of you will join us again in March. And until then, I say thank you again for attending. Thank you, Irena, again for being a speaker at this first workshop today. And I hope you have a wonderful day, good week, and also all the best seasonal greetings.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.